Hello everyone and welcome to Natural Resources Canada's e-training module on demand response and load management. This course has been adapted from the U.S. Department of Energy's Federal Energy Management Program training material. This training is being delivered through the Natural Resources Canada Greening Government Services to help federal departments and agencies plan and implement projects that reduce the energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in their buildings, laboratories, and other facilities. Over the years, Natural Resources Canada has been successfully developing comprehensive methodologies, practices, and tools to reduce energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions for the private and public sectors, including the federal government. Since 1991, NRCan has provided enhanced technical support to Government of Canada organizations seeking ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction actions from their buildings and fleet operations. This training will support federal organizations to meet their commitments and lead by example. Federal facilities having committed to reducing emissions from their operations by 40% below 2005 levels by 2030 and by 80% by 2050, as outlined in the 2016-19 Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. This initiative also supports the commitment by Canada's federal, provincial, and territorial First Ministers to scale up efforts to transition to highly efficient buildings and zero-emission vehicle fleets, as specified in the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. Let's begin by defining demand response. Demand response is a short-term, voluntary decrease in electricity use from end users, the customers. Customers reduce or shift their electricity use from periods of high demand to low demand and are rewarded for their actions. Demand response is used to manage the power grid and can help end-user customers reduce their electricity costs. Demand response events are triggered by the local electricity system operator for a number of reasons. It could be due to supply-demand imbalance, high wholesale market prices, or compromised grid reliability. So how do customers reduce or shift their loads? There are three general categories of demand response. The first category is load curtailment, or short-term conservation. Energy efficiency, load shedding, and load limiting all fall under this category. Load curtailment can be through actions as simple as dimming the lights, adjusting indoor temperatures, and temporarily slowing down or shutting off equipment such as pumps, fans, and refrigeration equipment. The second category is load shifting, where energy use is lowered during a peak demand period by shifting energy use to another time period. For example, facilities with refrigeration can adjust temperatures, pre-cooling during off-peak periods so that they draw less energy during peak periods. You can look at your facility's operation and see if there's any way to shift energy-intensive activities to the nighttime, weekend, or other periods when the demand on the grid is lower. Facilities can also make use of thermal energy or battery storage. By charging their energy storage devices at off-peak times, they will reduce the electricity demand during high-use periods. Finally, facilities can install and make use of on-site, also known as behind-the-meter, energy generation. This could be through a diesel generator, natural gas generator, or renewable energy generators such as wind and solar photovoltaics. There are several types of demand response programs available. The most common are reliability-based programs. In conventionally regulated utility areas, interruptible or curtailable rates are used to ensure grid reliability. For curtailable programs, consumers are given incentives or discounts to reduce their electricity usage to predefined values. Receiving rebates for energy-efficient products and home retrofits falls under this category. In areas with independent system operators, or ISOs, and regional transmission organizations, RTOs, capacity or emergency programs are frequently used. For capacity market programs, consumers commit to providing usage reductions when called upon by system operators, usually a day in advance. In emergency programs, participants are given incentives for load reductions during emergency situations. These types of programs are generally reserved for large users, but the threshold for participation can vary. Utilities may also deploy direct load control devices on loads such as air conditioners, water heaters, or pumps. These programs use a remotely controllable switch that can turn power to a load or appliance on or off to regulate the amount of power the load can consume. Ontario's Peak Saver Plus program achieves this through a device installed near participants' central air conditioners, electric water heaters, and/or pool pumps that enables the independent electricity system operator to shut down the devices for 4 hours. These types of programs are more common for residential applications. To initiate demand response actions, a utility will typically declare an event when the expected demand is going to peak. They can notify their customers that they should or must reduce their energy use during this time. Customers can either receive payment for participating in an event or face penalties for failing to participate. These events typically only occur once or twice per year. Another type of demand response is price-based programs. These programs are usually voluntary and are based on the customer's motivation driven by wholesale prices. There is both time-of-use pricing, with tiered pricing depending on the time of use, and real-time pricing, where consumers are charged the electricity price that fluctuates hours or days ahead of the actual use. Remuneration for price-based programs varies widely depending on supply and demand. Midsummer and winter is usually the most lucrative time of year, since energy demands are higher. It's important to note that remuneration options vary widely across Canada, and that DR program eligibility varies for different user groups and rate classes. There are also ancillary services that aim to keep the generating capacity available to the system operator within a short interval of time to meet demand in case the generator does go down or there is another disruption to the supply. This can be done through spinning or synchronized reserves. A spinning reserve is extra generating capacity that is available by increasing the power output of generators that are connected to the power system. For most generators, this increase in power output is achieved by increasing the torque applied to the turbine's rotor. Supplemental reserve is the extra generating capacity that is not currently connected to the system, but can be brought online after a short delay. There's also frequency regulation, where grid operators pay customers financial incentives to modulate power frequency in an effort to help the power grid maintain a stable frequency of 60 Hz. Most of these types of programs are available to only large industrial facilities, but again, eligibility requirements vary widely by service territory. Utility programs, which usually run reliability-based DR, generally call events more frequently than ISO-based programs, and smaller reductions on the order of 50 or 100 kilowatts are often permissible. Some also allow for load aggregation across sites or customers. If a customer falls under an ISO region, they sometimes can take advantage of demand response programs under both the ISO and the utility. In Ontario, for example, there is also a demand bidding program where consumers bid on load reductions in the wholesale electricity market. Ontario's annual demand response auction is a new program that secured approximately 400 megawatts of DR capacity for 2016. This is for consumers of electricity, such as mills, factories, and demand aggregators, who can provide substantial reductions that can be easily managed by the IESO. So how is event performance determined? The short answer is that it really depends on the program. Usually, event performance is compared against an historic baseline demand. For example, you could look at the recent demand history of a facility or look at the demand from previous like-season peaks. Then the event performance in kilowatts is calculated by subtracting the baseline usage from the event's period's usage. Each program has very specific requirements and instructions for determining event performance and may offer online tools and calculators to support this. Anyone entertaining behind-the-meter generation using gas or diesel generation needs to be aware of local requirements. There are generally very specific provincial and municipal requirements for generator use for non-emergency backup reasons. The requirements depend on the province, the fuel type, the program type, the engine vintage, etc. Each province has specific environmental and emission requirements for DR participation, and they publish guidelines for allowable uses and requirements. Demand Aggregation Service Providers, or DASPs, can help with both knowledge and necessary retrofits to existing plants as required. Demand response does not always have to be through a formal program. With time-of-use pricing, consumers are often rate discounted during normal and off-peak periods and charged higher rates during peak times. Time-of-use pricing allows consumers to shift their usage patterns from high-priced peak hours to less expensive off-peak hours by sharing information to make smart adjustments. Demand management can be a particularly effective strategy in jurisdictions featuring high peak demand pricing or in jurisdictions with demand ratchets and contract demand provisions in their utility rates. It is important to understand the rate structure for your facility and to determine if demand management may be a good strategy. Informal demand response involves strategies to minimize the ISO RTO capacity charge or demand charge. This charge is in most commercial and industrial bills and is based on the grid peak. The rules vary by the ISO RTO on how the charge is assessed. For example, it could be based on the highest single interval reading of summer, or an average of hourly interval readings during the highest 5 summer hours on different days, referred to as the customer's peak load contribution or PLC. For example, some Canadian Forces bases use their cogen or CHP to reduce grid power draws during predicted PLC hours. So how can we reduce demand during peak hours? In commercial buildings, HVAC and lighting energy use can be curtailed in response to a demand response event or to avoid peak demand charges. Buildings are usually designed and operated to deliver optimal comfort conditions for occupants. In its simple form, curtailment may only be temporary and only last for a few hours, but during those few hours, conditions may move outside traditional comfort zones. The National Research Council embarked on a series of studies to define reasonable times for service curtailment. The results of this study showed that electric lighting can be dimmed without negatively impacting the building occupants 20% over 10 seconds or 40% over 30 minutes in buildings with no daylight. The study also shows that indoor temperatures can decrease 1.5 degrees over 2.5 hours without impacting the building occupants. These two measures are simple ways that building occupants can reduce demand during peak periods. In more advanced systems, HVAC service curtailment may be avoided by using storage systems or by providing overservice prior to a DR event pre-ventilating to create indoor air with low levels of pollutants, allowing for a reduction of ventilation during DR. Can federal government facilities participate in demand response? The short answer is yes. This is particularly true of informal or tariff-based DR programs. In all cases, care must be taken that demand management and demand response measures do not negatively impact work environments as required by code and standards, and as may be required by collective bargaining units. The savings available through demand response initiatives vary, but can be meaningful under certain conditions. The savings really do vary depending on some or all of the following factors: the type of program, the location of the facility on the grid, which is affected by power supply and transmission congestion, the weather, as extreme hot and cold conditions drive demand and prices as well as grid reliability risks, and finally, the amount and frequency of the demand reductions possible at the facility. If a site in Ontario reduces 200 kilowatts of peak demand for 1 hour each business day in a load-shifting strategy, that site could save roughly $26,000 per year in demand and consumption charges. The City of Toronto successfully participated in the demand response programs being offered through the Ontario government by going through a demand response aggregator, Rodan Energy Solutions. The city had extensive backup generation capacity and a large number of facilities dispersed across the city. To take full advantage of the DR programs, the city needed an accurate assessment of their potential for load curtailment and the capacity of their existing generation to offset demand during a DR event. City personnel needed to understand the DR process and be alerted when there was the potential for a DR event to occur. Throughout the program, enrollment, and during any DR events, their facilities needed to maintain operations and continue to provide services to their 2.79 million citizens. Rodan Energy pre-screened the city assets and made recommendations on which sites were capable of shedding loads and which buildings' generators would best suit the DR program. Following the assessment, 22 separate sites were enrolled in the DR program for a combined DR capacity of more than 5 megawatts. As of 2016, the city has received more than $1 million for their participation in the DR program. To facilitate participation in demand response programs or site-level demand management, some of the functions can be automated. Partial automation generally involves using the building's energy management system to have pre-programmed routines run when initiated by operations staff or on predetermined demand thresholds. For instance, chilled water temperature can be set to rise a few degrees, and air handling units can be ratcheted down to partial speed. Fully automated DR, known as ADR, requires communication from an external trigger, such as an event call from curtailment service providers or a specified price per kilowatt from the grid to control systems. There are examples of utility-offered incentives for installing the hardware and software for ADR, so once again, it's important to become informed about what is available in your service territory. Programs vary widely across Canada, so it's important to do some homework to understand the particular demand charges you are incurring and to understand the programs that may be available. There are a few things that you can do, starting with your utility bills and reaching out to your local distribution company. You can also reach out to your ISO RTO to determine if they offer anything that is applicable to your type of facility. In terms of who is generally responsible for participation in DR, it varies with the type of program. Most information demand management activities are handled by the local property management staff, who use the facility control system to implement DR strategies. For ISO RTO programs, the services of a demand aggregation service provider are generally procured. These organizations intimately understand program rules and requirements and can help to navigate what can sometimes be a complex landscape. The proceeds resulting from participating in demand response can be collected in several means. For utility programs, a simple credit per kilowatt committed or reduced for each event within a billing period is most common. For ISO RTO programs serviced by a demand aggregator, the ISO or RTO may simply issue checks of electronic funds transfers, which may or may not be practical for federal facilities. Sometimes a credit towards the utility bill through the local distribution company can be arranged, but this generally requires tri-party arrangement. For example, a local distribution company can sometimes assist if site contracts DASP through a master agreements type of program. The main takeaway from this course is there are many ways of reducing your facility's demand and receiving incentives for it. Demand response is not one specific type of program. In fact, it doesn't even have to be a program at all. There are demand response programs available throughout Canada, and more are currently under development or in the pilot stage. If you are interested in participating, it's often just a matter of doing some research on your local utility or ISO to see what they offer. Now we will have some quiz questions to test what we've learned. Question 1. Demand response can be defined as a short-term reduction in electricity use driven by A. Compromised grid reliability, example from congestion. B. High electric market prices. C. Both A and B. D. Neither A nor B. The answer to the first question is C, both A and B. Question 2. DR participation can involve A. Load curtailment. B. Load shifting. C. Self-generation. D. Any of the above. The answer to question 2 is D. Any of the above. Question 3. True or false? Price-based or economic DR usually involves voluntary customer participation. The answer to question 3 is true. Question 4. Traditionally, most utility DR was via A. Direct load control. B. Interruptible curtailable rates. C. Demand bidding programs. Or D. Capacity markets. The answer to question 4 is B. Interruptible curtailable rates. Question 5. Dynamic pricing refers to electric pricing that is A. Time of use. B. Responsive to wholesale markets. C. Only provided by third-party providers. Or D. A special rate rider for customers with thermal storage. The answer to question 5 is B. Responsive to wholesale markets. Question 6. True or false? Utility demand charges of anything over about $5 per kilowatt per month often represent lucrative opportunities for load management. The answer to question 6 is false. It's more like $15 per kilowatt. Question 7. True or false? Independent system operators and regional transmission organizations are legally defined as utilities. The answer to question 7 is true. Question 8. Good sources for DR information for government facilities would likely be A. Energy service companies, B. Curtailment service providers, C. Your local utility, or D. Answer B and C. The correct answer to question 8 is D. B and C. Question 9. To truly take advantage of thermal storage, a customer would do best on A. A third-party power, B. A dynamic rate like day-ahead pricing, C. An interruptible curtailable rate, or D. Critical peak pricing. The answer to question 9 is B. A dynamic rate like day-ahead pricing. Here is our contact information if you have any questions concerning demand response. Thank you for participating.